Many traitor legions fell willingly into the clutches of chaos, either through their own twisted ideals or through the coercion of others. One, however, was seemingly an unwitting and unwilling pawn of the ruinous powers, thrust into betraying the Imperium by the Imperium's seeming betrayal of them. This legion was never large, but it was potent indeed, capable of harnessing the warp like no other could, but it was this power that would see them undone in both their bodies and their standing within the Imperium. Their Primarch was the greatest of them all in the arts of the Psyker, second only to the Emperor as humanity's most powerful user of the Immaterium, and with his ascension to demonhood, he has likely only become stronger. The Legion today is still small, its Psykers more powerful than before, but its other warriors reduced to naught but dust, automata created as a result of a mighty spell that, in a way, sought to save the Legion from itself. Hailing from the desolate world of Prospero, and now inhabiting the demon world of Sortiarius, more commonly known as the planet of the sorcerers, they are the 15th of the Legiones Astartes. Led by the Primarch Magnus the Red, also known as the Crimson King, they are, as they have been since their inception, the Thousand Sons. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to Legions, a 40k Stories mini-series. The 15th Legion were created late in the Unification Wars, sometime after the conquering of Luna but before the Great Crusade left Terra at large, with the initial recruits probably being drawn from what had been ancient Persia. At the time, warp storms had flared at the edge of the Sol system, and it was under these auspicious omens that the 15th was born. As they reached the minimum requirement to become a full legion, 1,000 Astartes seemingly hand-picked with far more care than for the other legions, the Emperor gathered them and bade his 1,000 sons to rise just as the warp storms cleared. The 15th seemed to take the name to heart, as their earliest known legion icon was believed to be a capital M after the Roman numeral for 1,000, though their growth was slower than the other legions due to their incredibly stringent recruitment. They weren't particularly distinct from the other legions at this time aside from this, though they did consider themselves slightly apart from their peers and brothers. One of their first battles came against a rebellious enclave called the Aceradine on the world of Castus, where the 15th used both brute force and a level of diplomacy and deceit to defeat the rebels despite only committing a tiny force. However, around 10 years into the Crusade, a new phenomena emerged that likely explained the tough recruitment of the Thousand Sons, as many members of the Legion began to develop psychic powers. Whether they were the very first Astartes psychers is unknown, but it was definitely on a scale far greater than seen before. The legionaries themselves were thrilled, and they put their new abilities to use with terrifying skill. For example, on the world of Valnum, a mere 60 warriors led by a captain were able to psychically defeat an entire Imperial Knight household with only 3 losses of their own. Despite the roaring success of their abilities and their own joy about it, the Thousand Sons found themselves dogged by the mistrust of humanity towards psychers, dating back to the horrors of the Age of Strife. The most obvious example came when a force of the 3rd Legion, the future Emperor's children, flat out withdrew from a campaign when the 15th showed up to assist, but many others, including Horus Lupercal himself, raised concerns about the growing power of the Thousand Sons or even wished them to be culled. The Legion probably ignored this and just kept fighting, but the calls would only grow louder following an incident on the world of Byzant. During the campaign against a force that finally gave the Thousand Sons a proper psychic opponent, seemingly at random an unknown legionary began to mutate. He was quickly killed by his brothers, but sometime later it happened again, and again, and again, to the point that it was given its own name by the Legion. They named it the Flesh Change, and supposedly it was contagious to the point that the Legion numbers began to actually decline as a result of it. We don't believe their numbers were as low as the 3rd Legions after the infection of their gene seed by the Blight, but it was still enough to send the Thousand Sons on an inexorable path toward total extinction. The exact cause of the Flesh Change remains unknown. Was it linked to their genetics, their abilities, or both? Or was it the result of something far darker? Those who know of chaos will likely debate the role of Tzeentch in manipulating the fate of the 15th Legion, but as ever with the changer of ways, the answer is at least partly unclear. Whatever the exact cause, the Thousand Sons could not cure the Flesh Change or reverse its effect, and despite their best efforts, they could not keep their curse a secret forever. When word got out, the calls for the 15th to be culled or disbanded only grew louder and more numerous, though for the time being at least, the Emperor showed no inclination to do so. Nonetheless, the Thousand Sons fought on bravely, continuing to wage their wars and even conquer new worlds for the Imperium that may well have been preparing to destroy them. The psychic abilities of the remaining Astartes only increased, which likely helped matters, but no one could deny that the 15th Legion was either heading for purging from the records or for becoming a footnote within them. However, they were to be saved from extinction as the Great Crusade arrived at the once verdant world of Prospero toward the centre of the galaxy. There they found the supposed salvation of the Thousand Sons, the ninth Primarch to be rediscovered by the Imperium, the Crimson King, Magnus the Red. Magnus was perhaps one of the luckiest Primarchs in many ways. As being a powerful psyker and a shapeshifter from a very young age, he would likely have been persecuted on almost every human world. However, he landed on Prospero, a world where almost the entire population had at least a spark of psychic potential, though it appears they had suffered for it. Prospero was all but lifeless save for the great single city of Tactica, with the cause believed to be the creatures known as the psychically. Apologies for pronunciation if that's wrong. The people now hone their power with the utmost control, likely in a similar manner as the Eldar do to preserve themselves, but despite the survival of humanity, only Tzeentch would ever truly flourish. When they saw his arrival, appearing like a comet in the sky and causing some sort of feedback in their dreams, the people saw the Primarch as a portent for something, though whether good or evil, they could not discern. Magnus was taken in by these people and trained under Arman, probably the greatest scholar of his age and someone seemingly aware that Magnus was a prodigy. As a result, he not only passed on knowledge and gave psychic training to the young Primarch, he also taught the ideas of control and humility, but even he could not keep up with his student, and Magnus became, eventually, the Crimson King of Tactica. The city flourished under his rule, with knowledge both arcane and otherwise piling to new levels as the mysteries of the universe were unravelled. The 5 Prospero cults were introduced, and the Great Pyramids were built, more on those later, as Tactica reached levels of intellect and psychic potential beyond what was even thought possible. Magnus was also unique amongst the Primarchs in that he knew his own origins. He was aware of the Emperor and of the Imperium long before it came to his door. He claimed to have been in telepathic communication with the Emperor for a very long time before the Great Crusade showed up, which, given their prodigious powers, is not too unlikely, especially since the Emperor deliberately brought the 15th with him to Prospero rather than summon them later. However, with what would happen in future, some might think that this individual may have actually been the Chaos God Tzeentch, who is believed to have had a hand in the fate of the Thousand Sons from day one. When Magnus did meet up with the Emperor and his sons, he committed all of his knowledge and time to curing the flesh change, and he eventually succeeded, though it would cost him one of his eyes to do so. Again, many believe Tzeentch had a hand in this, and some members of the Legion would later all but confirm it. Whatever the case, the flesh change was seemingly cured, though by the time he did it, the 15th Legion were back to the strength that their name would indicate, somehow exactly at 1,000 warriors. You may call it coincidence, but with the 15th and Magnus, you can never know. Now that his sons were reunited with him, Magnus set about restructuring the Legion to his own designs, changing what did not fit with his plans and leaving everything else. The traditions and ideals of Prospero were integrated seamlessly, as the Prospero cults forming the psychic schools of the Legion that sent the already prodigious powers of the Thousand Sons to levels not thought possible. Many of the Prospero population, including Arman, were elevated to become Astartes, and though the transition wasn't as smooth as for the youths that usually are chosen for ascension, the abilities of Magnus helped the old guard keep up. Interestingly, the Crimson King did not change the Legion's name, despite the wholesale changes he had already implemented. Perhaps he saw the exact number they had been reduced to and chose to keep it as a symbol, or maybe it was all part of his plan anyway. After all, I doubt he couldn't come up with something different or better. Whatever the reasons, for the moment the Thousand Sons had been saved from extinction and reinvigorated by the return of Magnus, they took to the battlefields of the Great Crusade once more. The Thousand Sons were a flexible force in the Great Crusade. They did not specialise their structure or fighting style particularly beyond the use of their psychic powers, though there was a slight preference for mobile warfare over attrition, probably due to their limited numbers. We do not know their first combats under Magnus, nor particularly can we track their path post-Prospero, but their combat/compliance record was pretty damn impressive as far as we can tell. A notable example was the war against the systems known as the Golden Apostles, a human Xenos alliance that had stubbornly resisted the Imperium in the past. Magnus seemingly did not commit enough forces to this war, but rather had laid elaborate plans far in advance that eventually saw the Apostles bled dry trying to reinforce their systems. It got to the point the Thousand Sons didn't even need to shoot them down due to the sheer volume of space debris. And yet, combat wasn't their true calling in a way. Magnus wished to use the Great Crusade to elevate humanity, even if it had to be violent in the short term to make it happen, and his main interest seemed to be the collection of knowledge as much as anything else. He also favoured diplomacy and guile to simple violence, but when he did take to the field, it is said he was rather brash or impetuous in command. He formed friendships with some of the Primarchs, notably Perturabo in the early days, as both were driven by a thirst for knowledge, and Horus, Khan and Lorgar in later times, when he and the Thousand Sons were always dogged by the mistrust of their brothers. Despite their successes and benefits, many in the Imperium still could not look at psychers as a positive light, either due to personal experience or because of the memories of the Age of Strife. The increased amount of warp-based creatures and activity encountered as the Great Crusade continued was certainly not helping matters in terms of making those who harnessed the Immaterium look good. Notable and vocal critics were Corax and Mortarion, the latter of which called for Magnus' censure on many occasions. His demands fell on deaf ears for a long time, but eventually more voices joined the choir, including Leman Russ, assumedly after the incident on Archreach Secundus, known to the locals as Shrike. Though we do not have a date, this battle is infamous for not only being open warfare, almost, between the Thousand Sons and Space Wolves, but also for being the first time the Flesh Change returned since Magnus had cured it. We do not know how many times it flared again between then and the beginning of the Horus Heresy, but I doubt the number was particularly high. It seemingly appeared at random and only affected a single Astartes that was swiftly slain by Russ, but it probably turned Russ even further against Magnus by the time the Emperor chose to listen to his detractors and create the Council of Nicaea. Though the official purpose of the gathering was to debate the Librarius Project's future in the Legion Astartes, a program Magnus had not created but had practically overseen since his arrival, many unofficially titled it as the Trial of the Thousand Sons. Though Magnus and many others spoke in favour of the continuation of the Librarius and in favour of psychers in general, a good number spoke against them too. It is also thought that some took the idea of Nicaea being Magnus' trial to heart. It is said that some cared not either way on psychers, but just wished to see Magnus censured in some way. Despite the numbers in favour and against being relatively even, many big names like Horus or Malcador seemingly remained deliberately neutral. In the end, Magnus' words were for naught, as the Emperor outlawed the use of psychers within the Imperium with the threat of punishment by his own hand should any step out of line. The only permitted psychers were the vital astropaths and navigators. The chaplain edicts elected by Lorgar was also enforced soon after to monitor the spiritual health of the legions and to keep an eye out for any who would go against the Lord of Mankind's judgment. Magnus was, to put it extremely mildly, not pleased, but he complied and stayed loyal to the Imperium, even supposedly warning Lorgar not to dabble in the ways of the Immaterium for fear of corruption. Whether this was foresight or just common sense, however, is unclear. Though on the surface they complied with the decree from Nicaea, the Thousand Sons effectively withdrew from the Great Crusade at that point, with Magnus and a large portion of the Legion returning to Prospero. Though many forces still remained in the galaxy prosecuting campaigns, they didn't stay too far from the homeworld. It is said that Magnus bade his sons continue their work in secret, effectively disobeying his father's orders, but keeping it hidden by never using psychic powers on the battlefield. It was through these experiments and works that Magnus came to know of the plan to corrupt Horus on Davin, and in attempting to save his brother, he would go on to doom himself. When Magnus first became aware of Horus's corruption, he saw the entirety of the forces arrayed on both sides, but could not see anything concerning the Thousand Sons. Horrified, he tried to prevent his visions by saving Horus during his dreams on Davin, where he projected his soul and attempted to stop Erebus in the Word-Bearers. He failed, obviously, and Horus fell into the service of chaos, but Magnus still believed he could rectify the situation by warning the Emperor as fast as possible, using his psychic abilities as opposed to slower, more legal means. Though he was successful, he inadvertently damaged the Imperial Webway project beyond repair, triggering the war in the Webway that would cost around 90% of the Adeptus Custodes their lives over 5 years and confining the Emperor to Golden Throne for almost the entire Horus Heresy. Whether he realized the consequence of his actions and retreated his mind before passing on the message is unclear, as is whether the Emperor believed him if he did communicate. But what is known is that the Lord of Mankind wished Magnus to be reprimanded for his disobedience of the edict at Nicaea. To that end, the Space Wolves under Leman Russ were dispatched along with the Custodes and the Sisters of Silence to arrest the Crimson King, but the now corrupted Horus either persuaded Russ or altered the order, resulting in a full-scale invasion of Prospero to wipe out the Thousand Sons. This battle, known most commonly as the Burning of Prospero, was odd for a number of reasons in its build-up, the most notable of course being the fact that it probably wasn't supposed to happen. However, Magnus also chose to scatter the Thousand Sons fleet and made no attempt to fortify Prospero in advance, despite evidently knowing of the censure fleets coming. He even drew a shroud over the planet so his seers would also be unaware, seemingly leaving Prospero ripe for the taking, but when an offer of surrender was sent, it was actually ignored, though some claim Magnus never received it. Despite the refusal of their father to join the fight or resist the Emperor's judgment, the Thousand Sons would fight tooth and nail in Tactica to stop the Imperial forces, even succeeding in stalling the advance pretty much everywhere Leman Russ wasn't. They were, however, forced to use more and more powerful abilities and dabble in darker magics to hold the Imperium back, in many cases abandoning the restraint on the source of their power and bargaining with dark forces. They even managed to psychically power an empty warlord titan to their aid, but they were undone when the flesh change returned once more. The first Marine to fall was consumed by his own psychic power, and the wave of energy unleashed from his death caused a mass breakout of both the flesh change and the curse of the Wolfen. This even had the effect of disrupting the link to the Warlord Titan, bringing it down and firmly swinging the battle in the Imperium's favour. The Thousand Suns fought to the last as a titanic warp storm continued to grow over Tactica, and seemingly space and time itself fell apart, falling back to the pyramid of Photep at the city's heart where Magnus was resting, or waiting, or something. Then, for reasons unknown, Magnus finally decided to join the fight and duelled with Leman Russ, but despite his prodigious abilities, he could not beat the Wolf King in close combat. Honestly, many believe no one save the Emperor was capable of that. Many Imperials believe Magnus died then and there, the popular myth being that his back was broken over Russ's knee. In truth, Magnus instead used his ability to teleport himself and the surviving Thousand Suns, pretty much exactly 1,000 of them, by what I'm sure is not coincidence, into the warp. Though I do not know if he had planned a destination or if it was a last desperate act of survival guided by Tzeentch, they all arrived on a demon world within the Eye of Terror known as Sortiarius, though today it is more commonly known as the Planet of the Sorcerers. Magnus did not survive in its entirety, however. Rather, his soul was shattered into at least 5 independent shards for a while, though many were tracked down by Chief Librarian Arman to prevent Magnus's form from deteriorating. One of these shards remained on Prospero and appeared before Jagtai Khan of the White Scars, imploring his brother to pick a side in the heresy, though it's unclear if it indicated a preferred side. Another came to the aid of the Salamanders, potentially guiding the 18th Legion through the ruined storm on their journey to Nocturne, while subtly convincing First Captain Artulus Numian to sacrifice himself to resurrect Vulcan. Either Magnus himself or another shard appeared via projection on Istvan V amongst Horus's war council, indicating that the Crimson King had, at least in part, thrown his lot in with Chaos fully, but Magnus's physical form did not reappear again as a mortal. Rather, he was potentially the first of the demon Primarchs, though we cannot be sure of the date of ascension relative to Fulgrim or Angron. As for the Thousand Suns themselves, their numbers were massively down, and they had at least been partially scattered prior to the burning of Prospero. As a result, tracking the actions of the various contingents is rather difficult, especially as any in Imperial space were likely killed or driven into hiding once word of their censure got out. We do know that a contingent of Thousand Suns engaged the Space Wolves in the Battle of Urant, but their leaders are unknown, so we don't know whether said contingent had fought on Prospero or not. Beyond that, the next confirmed appearance of the 15th Legion was at the Battle of Terror. Magnus the Red marked his vengeance against the Emperor's supposed betrayal on the battlefields of Holy Terror, as he and the Thousand Suns returned in force for the siege of the Imperial Palace. The 15th Legion were not on the front line of the initial siege, using sorcery and summoning demonic allies until the walls were breached. They pushed up more toward the later stages, but were repulsed by the Imperial fists under Rogel Dawn, whilst the librarians of the defenders did their best due to their psychic abilities. Assumedly the Edict of Nicaea was slightly repealed in this battle, though I believe it was never officially cancelled and left up to discretion in the aftermath. We don't know exactly where Magnus was in the battle, though it said he was amongst his legion, but since he's not mentioned explicitly, I assume he just didn't clash with Dawn at any point. In the aftermath, the Thousand Suns returned to Sortiarius via warp portals rather than fleeing with the other traitors, but waiting for them there was their age-old enemy, the flesh change which broke out en masse. Some, for once, saw this as a boon from Tzeentch, who they now openly served, but the vast majority were horrified and wished it to stop, lest they all devolve and lose the knowledge they had gathered. This time, though, Magnus seemed apathetic to the plight of his sons, perhaps because he knew it was beyond him to cure them since he needed Tzeentch last time, but the Thousand Suns were undeterred and a conclave was formed in secret. Led by Arman, the most powerful psychic besides the demon Primarch himself, they devised a spell known as the Rubric that, in theory, would prevent any further mutations within the 15th. It was a great success, and yet simultaneously a massive failure. As far as we're aware, the flesh change never manifested again following the casting of the Rubric, and the multitude of sorcerers within the Legion found their psychic powers massively boosted as a result of it. Unfortunately, all those without psychic potential or perhaps of low ability were spared mutation via the destruction of their very bodies, which were turned to dust. Their armour then sealed, trapping their souls within, and they became Norbert automata that only fully functioned on the command of a Psyker. They were henceforth known as the Rubric Marines. There is evidence that the rubric can be reversed, but it's only been achieved once by Arman for a single marine, or through the manipulative power of Ivrain of the Eldari, who seem to literally rewind their time. Though Arman and his cabal were banished by an enraged Magnus once the Primarch learned of their work, the Thousand Sons as a whole remained together as a legion for a fair old time, not splintering like many of the other traitors. This remained the case until M32, as Magnus sought personal revenge against the Sons of Leman Russ for the first time in what would become known as the Battle of the Fang. The entirety of the Legion and even their remaining human forces were committed to taking the fortress of the Space Walls, but despite going so far as to distract a huge number of the former 6th Legion away in advance, they failed through the wisdom and intervention of the dreadnought Bjorn the Fell-Handed, who held the Fang long enough for the remaining chapter to return. This defeat cost huge numbers of Rubricate as well as many in the upper echelons of the Legion, effectively splintering the Thousand Sons entirely into smaller warbands. Though they were all autonomous and committed innumerable atrocities for Tzeentch or against the Imperium, it appears as though these warbands still answered to Magnus in some way, even the banished Arman, as when the Crimson King called for them to reunify, they answered said call. As M41 drew to a close, Magnus manifested twice more in the Materium to wreak havoc alongside the reunited Legion, the first being as part of the second invasion of Fenris and the siege of said system. This time the Thousand Sons performed even better, and were frankly only beaten by the fact that Chapter Master Logan Grimnar's signature weapon was forged by Khorne himself. Don't ask, apparently some Chaos Champion was having a good day sometime. It wasn't all bad though for the 15th, as through a mighty ritual they were able to bring the planet of the Sorcerers into the material realm in the Prospero system, bringing a titanic warp rift along with it, though not on the scale of the Cicatrix Maledictum that came later. They then attacked the resurrected Robert Guilliman and the Terran Crusade, attempting to capture and kill the returned Primarch. The title fight between the brother Primarchs came on Luna, with Magnus seemingly heading for a decisive victory due to his overwhelming psychic power, but a detachment of Sisters of Silence came from Terra with the Custodes just in time to disrupt him to force him back, trapping him in the webway and making the Thousand Sons retreat. Magnus has subsequently escaped any prison the Labyrinth dimension could have created, leading the Thousand Sons into a successful assault on the Stygius sector as part of Tzeentch's plans. Only Mordian, a renowned Astra Militarum homeworld, appears to have held out. Now reunited and with a base in the Materium around their own home, the Thousand Sons seek to bring their power to bear against those who betrayed them. And so, with the tale of the 15th Legion told, let us look at a few famous individuals within the Thousand Sons. Part of the first batch of Terran recruits to the Thousand Sons, Isaac Arman and his brother Ormuz joined the 15th Legion together and rose through it. Both became captains and psychers, with Ormuz being the captain in charge of the campaign on Valmon we mentioned earlier on. However, Ormuz was one of those to succumb to the flesh change before the coming of Magnus, and though we're not sure if he was kept in stasis as part of a group called the Dreamless Brotherhood, we know he was not part of the post-Prospero Legion. None of those who succumbed to the change were cured by Magnus, so if Ormuz was in stasis, he would have died anyway. Isaac gained an even greater fear of the flesh change than perhaps any within the 15th, but he would go on to become chief librarian as well as first captain, magister of the Corvidae, the seer cult of the Thousand Sons, which I'll discuss more later, and commander of the Sekhmet that formed the Terminator armoured bodyguards of Magnus. Quite an impressive record, but Arman also shared Magnus's goal of wanting to make psychers more commonly accepted within the Imperium, encouraging the introduction of remembrances to the Legion Astartes so as people could see the good the Thousand Sons did. That's not to say that he and the Primarch got along perfectly, however. Arman defied Magnus by seeking him out on the world of Agaru, and when the flesh change flared up again in Archreach Secundus, he came to feel betrayed by Magnus, who had promised the mutation had been cured. Betrayal was also a prevalent emotion for Arman at Nicaea, where Othir, Wordmaker of the Space Wolves, spoke out against the Thousand Sons when Arman had considered him an ally or perhaps even a friend after discussions on Agaru. When the Censure Fleet came for Prospero, Arman and the Corvidae found their visions blocked somehow, and when they learned of Magnus's role in this and his deal for the flesh change, the rift between them only grew. The Chief Librarian implored Magnus repeatedly to join the defence, taking command himself when the Primarch refused, and making one wonder whether the Thousand Sons could have maybe held had the Crimson King been involved, given how well Arman did. When Magnus finally did enter the fray, he left instruction for Arman to receive the Book of Magnus, a tome containing all the sorcerers and arcane knowledge of the Primarch, and Arman took it whilst leading the Thousand Sons back to the Pyramid of Tactica. Magnus had deciphered the fates and knew Arman was to survive Prospero, but he was unsure of his own survival, so it could have been the equivalent to a parting gift, for want of a better word. Arman was then used as a conduit by Magnus to teleport the Thousand Sons to Sortiarius, from which he went on to gather many of the shards of Magnus, sometimes through defeating them in battle. He also began to research a cure for the flesh change in secret, despite being explicitly forbidden from doing so by Magnus, and this led to the formation of his cabal that would eventually cast the rubric. It's thought Magnus actually intervened and stopped the spell partway through, though if this is true I do not know why or what the true effect of the rubric would have been had it not been interrupted. Despite being a mighty seer as the head of the Corvidae, he could not have foreseen the outcome of the rubric, but he seemed at least content, if not pleased, with the result. I mean, the spell did its job, even if it wasn't quite in the way everyone would have wanted. Though it was hardly the first time he had betrayed the will of his Primarch, this was the rather large last straw for Magnus to punish Arman for his trespass. His original intention was to kill the Chief Librarian and the entire traitorous cabal, but Tzeentch is said to have stayed his hand, leading to the entire contingent being exiled from the Legion. Arman went quietly, perhaps too quietly, as he not only left the Legion, but went into seclusion and anonymity, serving in warbands and never unleashing his true psychic potential. Eventually, though, he was forced to, as another warband sought him out, this one led by Arman, who had been banished along with him. The two eventually fought and Arman won out, taking Arman's armour after having cast off his own long ago. He also transformed the paint of his new rubricized armour from the red of the Heresy era Thousand Suns to the blue we recognise today, and even returned to Prospero in an attempt to cast a second rubric that actually seemed to restore a single Astartes, Helioisidorus, I think it was? I forget. Eventually, Magnus and Arman somewhat reconciled, and the pair were both involved in the siege of Fenris. Arman still has his own goals, however, seemingly focused on the Black Library of the Eldari, which is said to be the greatest repository of knowledge in the galaxy. Though he has tried and failed to breach the library once already, he seems undeterred, and with the backing of his Primarch, Arman may one day achieve his goals. Arman was a Prospero native, and the original mentor of Magnus when the Primarch arrived there. Whilst he was seemingly born a Psyker, he and many others on Prospero seemingly did not manifest their abilities until a massive Psych-Nuine attack during Magnus' time there. Arman showed himself to be a seer, and was the original leader, or Magister Templi, of the Corvidae, though this would be passed to Arman when the Thousand Suns arrived. Arman was elevated to the ranks of Astartes despite likely being too old, so was probably like Luther and Corferin in a way, and he became equerry to Magnus as well as captain of the 9th and last Fellowship, the equivalent to one of the great companies in the other legions. He also had a more secretive role as Master of the Hidden Ones, an order within the 15th that acted as infiltrators and spies, among other things. Though at a glance many would assume them to be Astartes scouts or something like that, there is evidence that non-Astartes were also part of, if not all, of the Hidden Ones, unwitting sleeper agents who had no idea they were being used as sources of intel for the Thousand Suns. A supposed example was Caspar Hauser, the human attached to the Space Wolves Legion, but as this information was revealed by a demon, it's unclear whether it's true. Arman himself was also a stealthy individual, as it said even Magnus had trouble keeping tabs on the 9th captain, either physically or psychically. He was recorded as being present for the Triumph of Volanor, and was pretty much expected to be wherever Magnus was, but interestingly it's unclear whether he was at Nicaea. An individual that appeared to be Arman attempted to assassinate Caspar Hauser, further implying that the human was indeed a hidden one, as Russ and Constantin Valdor both suspected, but he was repulsed by Bjorn of the Wolves, and the incident may have had a bearing on the Emperor's decision, if you believe it wasn't already predetermined. However, this individual was not Arman at all. It was a demon, conspiring to bring ruin to both the 6th and 15th Legion. This was also, we believe, the same demon that revealed the Burning of Prospero was designed to do exactly that when Bjorn found him. Magnus, the real Arman, and the rest of the Thousand Suns at Nicaea were completely unaware of this, though it said Magnus could sense a shift in the atmosphere of the council after it reconvened. On Prospero, Arman too was angered at Magnus' refusal to fight the coming censure fleet, unwilling to believe his oldest friend and former student, despite Magnus confiding in him about what had happened. He took part in the defence as best he could, but was near to Magnus when the Crimson King finally decided to fight, as it was Arman who passed on the book of Magnus to Arman rather than the Primarch himself. The divide between teacher and student, though not too wide at this point, only worsened on Sortiarius, as Arman joined Arman's cabal in an attempt to cure the flesh change. What he thought of the result is unclear, especially as he had less personal experience with it compared to the Chief Librarian, but whatever he thought of it, his punishment was the same, and he was exiled from the Thousand Suns. He did not leave the planet of the sorcerers, at least not immediately, but when he did, he left with a warband of his own that I assume was made of rubrici and fellow exiles called the Brotherhood of Dust. His new mission was to ease the pain of the rubric on the Legion. By reversing it, and then destroying the Thousand Suns entirely, no, I don't follow that logic either. For that, however, he needed Arman and his unparalleled logic or knowledge of the spell, and so emissaries were sent out and every lead was chased. Eventually the former librarian was found, and when diplomacy failed, Arman repeatedly attempted to have Arman killed, though assumedly he could retrieve the information from his soul or something? Arman would come to Arman's fleet as time, and the two clashed in a psychic battle that took place outside of their own bodies. It was a soul war, I believe. The already wounded Arman actually lost, and Arman took the information before leaving him to die. But after being rescued by his allies, Arman unleashed the power of the rubric itself on Arman, turning him to dust. Arman took Arman's armor and inherited his warband, and the rest is history. Whether Arman would have been able to reconcile with Magnus like Arman has will likely never be known, but if anyone stood a chance of returning to the fold, it would have been Magnus's oldest friend and most trusted confidant, so I suspect he would have. Revuel Arvid was a member of the Corvidae just like Arman and Arman, but unlike the high-ranking captains, he was a sergeant in the 4th Fellowship under Captain Menez Calliston, mainly because his insistence on knowing absolutely everything came across as a lack of respect, keeping his rank lower than his prodigious power may have suggested. Like a fair portion of the Thousand Sons, he and his fellowship were with the fleet scattered from Prospero by Magnus before the Imperium came, meaning he was unaware of the planet's fall for quite some time. About 6 months afterward, Calliston decided to go back to Prospero in an attempt to discover what had happened to their home, and though Arvid was wanting to find out the Legion's fate in some other way, he agreed to go planetside with his captain. Whilst there, they came under attack from what they believed to be, or assumed to be, space wolves, but it turned out to be a force of world eaters under Angron's equerry Khan. Arvid was separated from Calliston and took it upon himself to find out what had happened to the Thousand Sons. Fortunate that he did, for Khan would go on to kill the 4th Fellowship's captain after refusing Calliston's offer of curing the World Eater's damaged mind. He eventually met up with the Keshik, bodyguards of the White Scar's Primarch Jagtai Khan, though the Primarch himself was not with them as he was potentially talking to the Shard of Magnus at the time. After aiding them in their later battle against Mortarion and the Death Guard, he was taken in as a guest of the 15th Legion and joined them in their attempts to get back to Terra. Their chief Stormseer, Targatai Yesuge, actually wished to induct the sergeant into the Scars fully, but Arvid refused and almost fled as a result, believing in some way his fate was tied to the raven that was the emblem of the seer cult of the Corvidae. This is part of the reason that some believe the Blood Ravens chapter are perhaps descended from the Thousand Sons. There is more evidence, but it's not confirmed. He stayed around, however, but soon he found the flesh change beginning to have an effect upon him. He somehow held it in check for the 4 years he spent with the Scars. Don't ask how, I have no idea. When Yesuge sacrificed himself to power the Dark Glass engine in order to give the White Scars a way home via the Webway, he tasked Arvid with getting his brothers home safely, and the sergeant did exactly that, but he passed out upon their arrival in the Sol system as the flesh change finally got the better of him. He was taken from the Scars by a member of Malkador the Sigillite's personal guards, who assured them that they had been expecting Arvid's coming and that they would attempt to cure him. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Rather than work to cure the change, Malkador wished to fuse Arvid with the Shard of Magnus that had remained on Terra after his ill-fated attempt to warn the Emperor all that time ago, wanting the new being to guard the Imperial Webway project that was now irreparably damaged. Whether this hybrid could have powered the Golden Throne indefinitely remains to be seen, given how quickly it killed Malkador, but it was part of Magnus, so maybe. Jagtai Khan then arrived and attempted to intervene, stop the procedure, and then he did so as the Shard began to consume Arvid by shutting off the devices keeping everything suppressed. He claimed Arvid as his ward, which after 4 years with the 5th Legion, I can sort of understand. The energy coalesced into a being that was neither Arvid nor Magnus, though it shared physical similarities with both and was now seemingly cured of the flesh change. When asked, it gave its new and true name, Aeneas, the same as Arvid's familiar or tutelary that he'd been linked with to since the Crusade days, which makes me wonder whether this being was at least partly demonic in nature. You would know Aeneas by a different name, the anglicised translation of the Latin, Janus. Janus was chosen, along with the other 7 Astartes, by Malkador the Sigillite to found the Grey Knights, and assumedly because of its immense power and potentially unique nature, he was appointed as the original Supreme Grand Master of Chapter 666. He survived at least until the War of the Beast and its immediate aftermath, as the inquisitorial representative of the High Lords of Terra sought him out after receiving knowledge of his existence from one of the 4 original founders of the Inquisition. From there, Janus falls off the historical grid, and he assumedly died at some point since, well, he's no longer Supreme Grand Master. The earliest date for a new leader was in M34, but it's not stated that this individual was the direct successor to Janus, so we don't exactly know when Revuel Arvid, or whatever he became, passed from this world. As they form the foundations of the psychic teachings of the Thousand Sons, I wish to look at the Prosperine cults before we wrap up today. The Fivefold cults, as they were sometimes known, were founded by Magnus on Prospero even before the Legion arrived and were schools for the different types of psyker. If an individual could use multiple disciplines, their cult would be the one for the discipline they were most skilled in. Headed by an individual known as the Magister Templi and based out of their own massive pyramids in Tactica, the cults were easily integrated into the Thousand Sons as part of the wholesale reforms Magnus made when he took over the Legion. They stood apart from the standard Legion structure, as members of the cults were drawn from across all fellowships and ranks, with psychic power being the only prerequisite for entry. The cults themselves were known as follows. The Corvidae were masters of divination, seers and manipulators that were often great strategists as a result. Their symbol was a raven's head, and notable members include Arman, Revularvida, and its Magister Templi Arman himself, who we've covered earlier. The Raptora, whose symbol was an outstretched claw, were a cult of telekines. Reality was their playground, and everything in it was bent to their will if desired. Often the coolest heads and thus great scholars, the Raptora were capable of summoning kinetic shields to protect themselves and even all of Tzeentch, as well as throw the laws of physics through a loop on a whim. Their Magister Templi was Phocis Takar, captain of the Second Fellowship, who allowed himself to be slain on Prospero by Constantine Valdor as the flesh change took hold, even though he could kill custodians with relative ease. Whilst the Raptora dealt in the physical world around them, the Pavoni used biomancy to both destroy the bodies of their foes and protect their own. Their symbol was a colourful feather, and their abilities allowed them to perform medical procedures both vital and cosmetic. It would not surprise me if many of the Apothecarian were Pavoni members, though the cult itself was more renowned for oratory and matters of belief. Their Magister Templi was Third Fellowship Captain Hathor Mart, one of the best psychic healers in the Legion and a survivor of Prospero, though he began to fall to the flesh change during the hunt for Magnus's shards, and so was sacrificed to allow the summoning by Arman of Kairos Fateweaver. The Pyrae, as the name may imply, were pyromancers. They took the symbol of a winged phoenix and were probably the most destructive of the Fivefold cults. They could wield fire with impunity and were sometimes even immune to flames in turn, but it seemed that control of machinery was a secondary aspect of the Pyrae. As a result, control over the unique psychically controlled battle automata likely fell under their jurisdiction too, which makes sense as well because of the great martial pride that many members seem to have. Their Magister Templi was the captain of the Sixth Fellowship, Calophis, though the Eighth Captain, Auramagma, was also a member. Calophis was the one to activate the warlord titan Canis Vertex during the Burning of Prospero, implanting his consciousness within the empty god machine that he himself had brought to the planet after an unknown campaign. But he died alongside the titan when it was destroyed and took his soul with it. Finally, there are the Athenaeans, the telepath cult with the symbol of an eye. Their skill was with matters of the mind, assumedly messing with their opponents in battle, but their primary role in combat was communication. The Athenaeans formed a seamless and secure network of psychic communion with their brothers, often teaming up with the Corvidae to relay what the seers had been able to learn. Away from war, they were often described as withdrawn, though they also served as emissaries in many cases. Having mind-read-esque abilities probably would be beneficial. Their Magister Templi, at least before the Burning of Prospero, was Balak Uthizar, captain of the Fifth Fellowship. Balak attempted to aid Magnus when the Primarch fell into a depression after failing to warn the Emperor, but in doing so, he saw much of Magnus's past, including the deal to cure the flesh change with Tzeentch. He attempted to tell the rest of the Legion, supposedly by physical means and leaving rather than using his powerful telepathy, but he was killed by Magnus before he got chance. Who succeeded him as Magister Templi is unclear. The Burning of Prospero was not much later, so there may not have been time to appoint one. The Fivefold cults now do not exist. It seems as many of the Thousand Sons were able to manifest abilities from multiple disciplines once they arrived on Sortiarius. Arman was confused by it when he was able to cast biomancy. It is not confirmed that the cults were disbanded officially, but their necessity was definitely reduced by this change, and so they may just be symbolic if they even remain at all. So end the tales of the Thousand Sons Legion. The 15th were one of the most dangerous of the Legion Astartes, both to themselves and, in a way, to their enemies. Though a blessing, their prodigious psychic abilities were also a curse, as it brought them mutation, censure, and eventual near annihilation. Nonetheless, the willpower of the Sons of Magnus to keep fighting through whatever hand fate dealt them must be commended, even if they are naught but a hollow reflection of themselves in the modern era. This is a Legion I've been rather impatient to cover, as the history of Magnus & Co. has always been a favourite of mine, and I hope I did them justice. We only have one more Legion to cover before we reach the end of the road, and that will require a trip to Holy Terror itself. Oh, goodness help me. Whilst we're en route, I wish to cover a force that is actually stuck to the decree of Nicaea, refusing to field any psychers, but their zeal and martial prowess are renowned nonetheless. I hope you can join me for that, and that you've enjoyed this penultimate part to Legions, our 40k Stories miniseries. Thank you all for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.